All right, so back to the servant. He's at this well, and he prays for this sign, and Rebekah comes out, and she performs the sign right in front of him. And
the emphasis, like, it happens immediately. Like, before he's even done praying, she's there. So, I mean, the author's obviously showing, like, the sign is happening. You're seeing it.
Whether in real time or in background work, God has worked this out to be already prepared.
Right.
In which case would necessitate him to know already that the servant was going to pray. And more wrenches. I'm going to leave that alone.
If you could only see the smoke coming out of Caleb's ears right now as he's trying to...
These are the questions I wrestle with. Oh, man. Okay, let's trudge through and just leave that behind. Don't touch it. Walk around it. Okay, so we begin what is called a betrothal journey narrative. And this involves basically someone coming to a well, a guy coming to a well, and he meets a young woman at the well. She draws some water, and some gifts are given since she has done that. And then that person then reveals who he is. And then the woman rushes home with news of that person's arrival, and the family returns to greet the man. A betrothal is arranged. The man then lives with the bride's family, sometimes having children, and then the man begins working for the bride's family in some way. And that one, I don't think actually happens in this one, but that step is left out. Then the man goes home and is received by his own family at the end of the journey, and the man resides with his family, with his children and wife. So this is basically just a story where a guy comes to a well and meets the woman and her family. It plays out in a very similar way. In this story, it happens with Jacob when he comes to a well. It happens with Moses, like we already talked about, when he comes to a well. I think it happens with someone else too. I can't remember who was it, Ruth? Anyway, happens a few times, but it's a very distinct pattern. And again, this is from Michael Martin, his article, Betrothal Journey Narratives. I think that was in Catholic Biblical Quarterly, but... It's a good article for seeing how these narratives work, and also how there's kind of an inversion of it with Jesus when he comes to the woman at the well. So, it's a cool article. So we see that pattern start to take place, very recognizable. So again, that means that if we have a pattern in the text, then the deviations and the way the pattern is played out helps us to teach us things and help us think about it in a certain way because we were expecting this pattern and it happened differently. So
okay, so he starts by adorning her with some pretty amazing gifts, right? Mm-hmm. And so what's the significance of that?
So I think this might be pointing to the way the law was meant to adorn Israel. If you see Ezekiel 16, you'll see that Yahweh adorned Israel with jewelry to make her beautiful in the eyes of the nations. And if you read in places like Deuteronomy 4, I think Deuteronomy 4:16, let me see real quick. Like in places like Deuteronomy 4, 5 through 8, where the law is shown to be what is going to make Israel beautiful in the eyes of the nations and attract them to Yahweh. And so that might be the significance here of the adoring. It just fits in that pattern. Since this is so tightly connected to the Exodus story, it just makes sense to me to possibly see that as another link. If this were just here by itself, I would say, no, probably not. But with all those other links, it fits. So
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. I did not catch that before, but that does make sense for sure. Okay, so we move on from this really extravagant gift, which also shows just how wealthy Abraham is. I mean, we continue to highlight just God's fulfilling His promise here to Abraham to make him a great name and a great nation. And then we go from that to, where she runs back to her family, introduced to Laban.
Yeah, her brother.
Who, like, you read this story the first time and you think, oh, he's kind of a nice guy. And he's very hospitable, but then you start really meditating on it, and then you read the next story in a couple chapters, and you start to realize, oh, maybe his hospitality is not very genuine.
Yeah, you actually, in verse 30, you see the motivation for his hospitality, because it says, as soon as he saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister's arms, oh, this guy's rich.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And so then he went and invited him, hey, come on in, get a meal, all that kind of stuff. So his hospitality, we're not told outright, but we're just given a note that before his hospitality begins, he noticed all the gold that his sister had gotten from this guy. And
he runs.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, at the beginning of verse 30, there is kind of a break in the sentence where it says like "vayehi," it's and it was, and so there's kind of a new thought there, but carries forward because it says that he ran, and then it goes back to verse 30 and kind of tells why he was running. As soon as he saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister's arm, and then heard the words of his sister, "Thus the man spoke to me," then he went to the man. So it kind of comes back to verse 29 and full circle.
Okay, so then we have the servant comes and they sit down to eat a meal, and he's like, "No, I'm not going to eat anything until I say what I've got to say." And then he goes on to retell the whole story. But he highlights, I think, specific things in here, right? He's highlighting the vast wealth of his servant, or his master, Abraham. He highlights the sign. He prays for the sign, and immediately, before he's even done praying in his head, Rebekah shows up, and
he's trying to convince them, this is not my request, this is God's request.
Yeah. I think he's trying to sweeten the pot too. Like, look, if you know what's coming, you know that there's going to be a proposal here. The dude is wealthy; she'll be well taken care of. You can trust me. And so, but again, I think the length of the retelling of the story here is also just to show you that God is in this, and that He will accomplish what He set out to do, and He's going to fulfill His promises.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and just for reference, this little retelling is a quarter of the chapter. So
right.
It's about 15 verses in a 60 verse-ish chapter. So definitely you're supposed to pick up on this and say, why is he repeating this in so much detail? And like you just said, just see the way that the Lord is showing up and providing for this and behind this. And I wonder if we're supposed to read this with Laban's personality that we've already been shown, if we're supposed to read that. And okay, when he talks about the blessedness of his master, he's going to give in to this because he just wants more money. Whether he gets it or not, he sees this as an opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, I see Laban right now as just like salivating at the mouth and just, oh man, he's probably, and Laban's he's a relative of Abraham. I wouldn't be surprised if he's heard stories of Abraham's journeys and riches, and now here there's this possibility of, because the expectation too would be that if you're gonna, there's a dowry that's expected. If you're gonna take my sister, you're gonna leave us with something good. Right.
Yeah, and so seeing that, starting back in verse 50, the thing has come from Yahweh, we cannot speak either bad or good, and so, behold, Rebekah is before you, take her and go. That's where you see that take and go phrase.
Right.
And like I mentioned, it does show up in, actually in Genesis 12:19 as well, when Pharaoh tells Abraham, take and go with Sarah.
Right.
And then also in Exodus 12:32, yeah, it shows up there again where Pharaoh tells Moses, after everything, take and go.
So then they try to delay.
Yeah. So that, they've given their blessing, and then they turn around, and so Abraham's servant, he hears their words, bows himself before Yahweh to worship, that he has prospered their journey and put it in their hearts to give her, to let her go. And then he adorns her some more in verse 53. And then, so they're still dwelling there, even though they've given their blessing for her to go. And, in this culture, you're staying with them until it's just time to depart for your journey again. They want to keep them around. So they say, let the young woman remain with us. In our translation, the ESV, it says a while, at least 10 days. Literally, it says, let her stay days or 10. And so I like how in Walke's commentary, he talks about how it's just this kind of undefined phrase. Let her stay days or 10. Like, what does that mean? So it could mean like a couple days, 10 days, 20, 100, And I don't know, maybe they're trying to keep her around because, they don't want to lose their sister. This is a pretty common sort of exchange back in the day. It may be more so because they're trying to milk their relationship with the servant some more.
Yeah.
I feel like my money's on that one. But,
this is a normal practice. It's not unusual for, and there's actually some wisdom in this. In a normal situation, especially if it was the actual, not a servant, but the actual person or the actual husband-to-be that's there, it's good for the family to get to know this guy and to make sure that they're sending off their daughter with somebody who is genuinely going to take care of her.
Mm-hmm. Well, but this is I think this is even more akin to, say, like on the wedding night, the reception's going on, and then it's time to shut it down and go home, and for the bride and groom to go off. No, stay, hang out, keep
right.
Let us go. But yeah, I think it's kind of the same thing. Like they've agreed to the proposal.
Right.
She's going to go be his wife. The deal's kind of done. Let's go now.
Yeah. Why the wait? But so yeah, I do agree with you. I think that this is probably Laban trying to milk a little bit more out of the situation.
Right. So he says, don't delay me since Yahweh has prospered me. Send me on my way. So that same keyword that usually shows up throughout Exodus, send me away. Let me go. Shalach. And so they say, all right, well, let's just let Rebekah decide. And she comes in. And so, again, just like Abraham, she's faced with the choice to leave Haran and go to the land of Canaan in order to go be with Yahweh's elect, or in Abraham's case, to be Yahweh's elect. And both of them say, I will do it, and they make the same journey from Haran to Canaan. So they're put on.
She's kind of like the new Abraham.
Yeah, she is.
In a sense.
Yeah. The ties get even closer as you read on down to verse 60. So read verse 60 there.
Verse 60 says this, and they blessed Rebekah and said to her, our sister, may you become thousands of 10,000s, and may your offspring possess the gate of those who hate him.
Yeah. All right, let me read one more verse before we talk about it. And this is Genesis 22, verse 17. This is to Abraham, God speaking. And it says, I will surely bless you. I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand of the seashore, and your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies.
Yeah.
So
sounds very similar.
Yeah. Same conquering language, possessing the gate of his enemies, which at this point is crushing the seed of the serpent, not the serpent, but they are defeating the seed of the serpent, which is pointing forward to the conquering of the serpent himself. Yahweh and his people have the power to do that. And then also the same multiplication. They used the word thousands of 10,000s for Rebekah, but as much as the stars for Abraham. 6 one, half dozen the other. But they get a similar blessing here, linking, again, Abraham's trajectory and Rebekah's trajectory, putting them side by side and also showing that, okay, the elect seed is going to continue on through her and her family. Now, one thing I think we should ask here is, okay, Laban, he is interested in money. It seems like maybe the mother is too, because she was going along with, like, let her stay, that kind of stuff. They don't seem like upstanding characters. They're also just some, they're Abraham's family, but they aren't on the same journey with Yahweh that Abraham is on. So as far as where their allegiances lie, there's some random yahoos. Why did they say this? I mean,
ooh, interesting.
Was this just some strange historical coincidence that the author wrote down for the sake of, he was like, ooh, that sounds good. I'm going to write it in my little story here.
So does this go back to, like, the promise that I'm going to bless those who bless you and curse those who dishonor you? And are we going to see them blessed?
So I think that their blessing on Rebekah is supposed to link us back to all of those previous blessings from the last time we saw it in Genesis 22 with Abraham at his climactic moment, as well as all of the promises that led up to it in Genesis 15 and 17 and 12 and Noah's covenant in Genesis 9 and Adam and Eve's, and just all these elect promises that are all kind of beating around the same bush, kind of, again, are plugged into Rebekah's storyline now.
Yeah, and it's just interesting that it's coming from these...
Right.
I would assume pagan.
Yeah, probably not prophets, it seems, so far.
Right.
Maybe, but... So, I just think it's interesting to point out here that, again, Genesis is a crafted narrative. And did Rebekah's brother and her mother actually say this? I don't really know, maybe. But the point here, I think, is the author is, through another avenue, putting this blessing into their mouth in order for it to go on to Rebekah from those that are sending her off. Again, this is one of those places where it's, this is really weird and just unlikely if this is just meant to be, they just happen to randomly say this and then the author writes it down. It could be that they actually did, but the point is not who said it, is the blessing legitimate if it comes from them. The point is the author has put it in their mouth in order to echo the previous blessings so that the blessings of the story are put on Rebekah going forward.
Yeah. Yeah, so the emphasis here is not who's saying it. It's that Rebekah is now one of the elect.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and again, the question of historicity that comes up, that's not the point, and so that's either like, I'm just content to say I don't know, but the point is still the story, the weight of the phrase within the narrative. That's what matters.
Yeah, for sure.
So the Exodus little scene here wraps up, starting with Well, actually, if we go back a couple of verses into verse 59, it says, "And they sent Rebekah, their sister, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant, and his men." So there's kind of our mixed multitude, and then they get sent out with this blessing, just like Israel gets later in their story, and also this is just the same elect blessing that's been following the elect so far. And then Rebekah in verse 61, "And her young women arose and rode on camels," and she has already gained the adornment and the jewelry that the servant has given her. So great possessions, mixed multitude, that's going on here. And then we come back to Canaan, where Isaac has been walking around in the field. I just want to say one thing about this section that I am not 100% certain of, but I think, again, with so many parallels to the Exodus, maybe. So it's worth mentioning that Rebekah plays the role of Israel in this story, and the servant plays the role of Moses. That much, I think, is pretty clear. So just if you follow that same trajectory, Isaac kind of plays the role of Yahweh in this. And so that, to me, it just makes it interesting that Rebekah speaks to the servant and the servant speaks to Isaac. But Rebekah and Isaac never speak to one another. There's always this intermediary, Moses, or the servant. And so maybe that's just another parallel to Moses and the whole Israelite Exodus story. I don't know. That one doesn't feel like as tight of a connection, but it's interesting given the other connections to the Exodus story.
Yeah, I had never caught that either.
Yeah, so and then there's just a nice resolution to the story. She veils herself and she goes to Isaac, and then they go in the tent and they consummate their marriage, and he loves her, and it says Isaac was comforted after his mother, her death, which was the previous chapter. And so, there was that kind of bittersweet note in the last chapter, and so there's kind of a nice just narrative resolution within this chapter before moving on to the next story. And so, again, just more narrative artistry with this author that I think we need to appreciate and let it be the grounds by which we interpret the rest of the story.
One last thing I wanted to just kind of mention about this chapter that I noticed as I was studying it is there's an emphasis on the chesed of God. And you see it, I think you see it at least implied with how Abraham feels about the mission that he sends his servant on. It's explicit in the prayer, and then in his explanation. And then he asks, when he requests or makes the formal proposal to Laban and Rebekah and their family, he says, "Will you show your hesed towards my master?" Also, just like Yahweh has shown hesed towards him, will you show hesed towards him? And so I think we're meant to see that highlighted and recognize that God's character is this steadfast love, this never giving up on love, this covenant faithfulness kind of love in this passage. And obviously that extends all the way to Jesus. Yeah,
no, that's good. Did you pull that from the Story Bible? The never giving up love?
I've heard that from, I think it was on a T-shirt.
Oh, okay. I read that to Ellie, and that's what it is. It's like the never giving up, never stopping, never ending love.
Well, I have read that Story Bible like 100 times to my kids by this point, so it's probably just kind of ingrained in my my vocabulary. It's like it is mine now. So,
well, cool. All right, we'll dive into chapter 25 next time and keep on with the story, and finally get to dive into Jacob and Esau before jumping back to another story with Isaac and moving on through Genesis. And maybe we'll see if we can stay true to our word of this 6 more months of Genesis thing or not. So, all right.